Welcome to the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. In today's podcast episode, I'm being joined by Adam Fraser, Chief Operating Officer of Omniscient Neurotechnology. Also joining is Water Tower Research Healthcare Analyst Robert Sassoon. Omniscient Neurotechnology is a privately held Australian-based but US-focused brain AI company applying Connectomics to map and interpret the brain's 90 billion neurons and more than 100 trillion neural connections. Its flagship product, Quicktome, an FDA-cleared AI-powered web application, converts standard medical imaging into clinically actionable insights for neurosurgical planning, neurocritical care, and mental health. So without further ado, allow me to welcome Adam and Robert to the podcast.
Good morning, gents. Pleased to be with you.
Good morning, Tim, and good morning, Adam.
So, Adam, before I hand it over to Robert for several questions, I'm going to ask you a couple of things here. So, first off, can you talk to our listeners about your professional background and what brought you to the firm?
Sure. I'll try and keep this brief as it now spans a couple of decades. Great to be here. I hail from Leeds in the UK. I started my professional career with the big accounting firms there. I've spent the last 25 years living in Australia. I came here professionally originally. I've had a range of finance, corporate finance, private equity roles. Probably most notably for this podcast, I've been CFO of a company that went to an IPO on the ASX. I've also been CFO of a private company that was in IT services that was sold to one of the big four consultancies, a range of other roles in between. But yeah, about 5 years ago, I got approached about a potential role with a startup called Omniscient. I went to the website and tried to work out exactly what it did. I entered the world of Connectomics and brain mapping and yeah, have never looked back since. It's great to be part of a business that has such a meaningful, purpose and mission, but equally can also be an incredibly successful commercial enterprise.
Yeah, it's actually a fascinating sector to be sure. Additionally, could you also just run us through Omniscient's business model to perhaps include your capital raise game plan and a 30,000-foot overview of the business strategy of the firm?
Sure. I guess to start at the top, Tim, we're specialists in a field called Connectomics. In the simplest terms, we use AI to decode the human brain, arguably the most complex organ, the most complex thing on the planet. As you mentioned, 90 billion neurons, 100 trillion plus connections in a single brain. This is very much a data science as much as it's a neuroscience challenge to unlock the mysteries of the brain. So yeah, hailing from Australia, We've become the global market leader in the field of connectomics. We've got 2 FDA clearances to develop a commercial platform. We're bringing essentially a new field of medicine we call clinical connectomics to the US hospital system. Our initial focus is on the US market. We think this has got global applicability. There is so much to unlock about the brain, the scale of mental health challenges. 1 in 5 Americans every year suffers from a diagnosable mental health disorder. You've got a range of neurodegeneration, neurosurgery. We feel that this can take brain care and brain insights to the next level. We're about 6 years old. We're about 50 people around the world. We have a team in both Australia, the US, and Canada. We've cumulatively raised $85 million on our journey to date. Initially, we were funded by an amazing group of high net worth and family offices. Just before Christmas 2025, as has been announced, we're delighted to have closed an institutional round with 2 lead venture capital institutional investors here in Australia. And yeah, we're excited for the next phase of our journey.
That's great. Congratulations on the successful fundraise. And I'll turn it over to Robert on that note.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And Adam, good to have you on this podcast. I'm really was looking forward to this particular subject. It's close to my heart. Anyway, yeah, you mentioned the Connectomics, which is a fairly recent addition to the scientific lexicon. So can you explain a bit more about this emerging space and how your Quicktome platform brings Connectomics to clinicians today? And what is the high-level commercial model for this platform?
Sure. No, great question, Robin. It's not uncommon that when we come to talk about the Omniscient business in the audience, it's the first time they've heard the word Connectomics. It is still a relatively new field of science. One thing I should make clear up front, Omniscient did not invent the field of Connectomics. It's been around for a long time. There's 100,000 plus scientific papers on Connectomics. It's an established field that was really cemented and validated by something called the Human Connectome Project, which the NIH under the Obama administration funded 2009, its findings came out over a series of years, finally in around 2015, 2016, and it really provided a sort of base level for the industry to apply Connectomics in the field. So essentially, we're the first commercial organization to take Connectomics out of the lab into the market. We make it accessible, scalable, and usable. It's an incredibly complex field. And I think probably the best way to explain it to a non-clinical listener is, we talk about being the Google Maps of the human brain. So in the same way, it works on a couple of levels. The disruption and the shift from paper maps to digital maps in itself was enormous. And then Google, of course, took that to the next level when they acquired Waze. So you can see, where are the roads? What is the traffic on the roads in the mapping world for transport? If you think of the brain as a supercomputer, billions of connections, as we've talked about, neural highways, different parts of the brain talking to each other. It's all about looking at circuits and networks. Connectomics allows you to look at the structure of the brain. We call it, where are the networks? And then also the traffic of the brain, the functional connectome. How are those networks in the brain talking to each other? And if you think about, there are dozens and dozens of use cases for our business, but maybe 3 examples give a good sense of why those different types of analytics about the brain matter. If you're a neurosurgeon, and our opening use case is very much focused on neurosurgical planning and tumor resection, it's all about where are the networks? What do I want to avoid cutting through to minimize deficits after I remove a tumor? And again, via Connectomics, via the Quicktome platform, clinical users can now get a whole range of insight and analytics that weren't available from simple 2D imaging. If you then move to maybe disorders of consciousness or coma, both structure and function can matter. Is there tracked, is a patient going to wake up is the big question if a clinician is looking at a coma situation. Tracked damage, tracked health, if there's, issues with the structure of the connectome and the network, that can obviously impact the likelihood of waking up. But equally, even if the structure isn't intact, but the function is not talking as we would expect, that gives another very strong indication of the likely, brain function if a person is to wake up. And then if you move into sort of psychiatry and mental health disorders, largely the big focus there is all about connectivity of the brain. Which areas are underactive, which areas are overactive. And via the research part of our platform, we can look at what we call an anomaly matrix. How does your brain compare to a batch of normal brains? And then we can identify which parts of the brain are firing too much, too little, and really start to unlock some of the mysteries that today, have been invisible to mankind. So this really is taking brain insights to the next level. In terms of commercialization, we sell a SaaS platform. We're very intentional about the fact that we didn't want to sell a point solution. So many medtech biotechs target a very specific, single use case. I'm all about treatment-resistant depression, or I'm all about epilepsy. We wanted to take almost like a Microsoft operating system view of the brain data economy. We want to provide a brain insights platform that over time, dozens and dozens of users and departments within a hospital can use those insights. So again, we're starting with neurosurgery. We're already looking at stroke and coma and traumatic brain injury. Over time, we'll expand further, epilepsy, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and then long-term, the real North Star is mental health.
Yeah, you mentioned, earlier on in your answer that Google Maps and what was before Google Maps. So for context, what was available with respect to brain mapping prior to Quicktome?
It's a great question, Robert. And look, there was mapping solutions in the same way of, I started my career in London. I still remember the London A to Z, driving around with a map perched on my leg. I came to Australia. It was a Gregory's map. So look, there is something called tractography, DTI, diffusion tensor imaging. There were mapping solutions available. I think the challenge, and one of our co-founders is one of America's leading neurosurgeons and global subject matter expert in the field of connectomics. He talked about, whilst they were visually captivating, you can search them on the internet and go, wow, look at that brain map with all of those colored wires connecting together. It was very hard, even for professional clinicians, to make a lot of sense of it. Probably a good analogy for the US listeners, it didn't differentiate between the I-95 freeway and the laneway behind your house and, you know, the road on the high street. It was just a mass of connections, but it didn't group them in clusters that were useful. It didn't prioritize the messaging that really mattered to a clinician that doesn't have a lot of time to dive into every single patient. So we've really, Connectomics and the Omniscient Quicktome platform have taken that to the next level in terms of depth and granularity of insights, but also we've very much built for with users in mind. What's useful, what's manageable, what's quickly accessible, what are the key messages we can convey in a map and through templates, in a massive noise. What is the signal? What is the noise?
So what are the primary use cases clinicians are using Quicktome for today, and where do you see this expanding across neurology in the future?
Yeah, look, good question, Robert. And again, like many startups, when I joined back in mid-2021, the whiteboard was jammed with potential use cases. Because like I say, if you think of, any neurosurgical intervention, when you think of any neurology, dementia, neurodegeneration, mental health, ADHD, epilepsy, Alzheimer's, the potential ideas roll off the tongue. But like any startup, being cautious and prudent with our capital, and just in terms of executing on such a new disruptive technology, you clearly can't do everything at once. And when you approach a US hospital system, you can't talk about 100 things because you're sort of then talking to everyone, you're talking to no one. So again, based on the expertise of our US founder and the team, we targeted neurosurgical planning as our first use case. We call it land and expand. We want to land inside major hospital networks in the US with a single use case, and then over time, as a platform offering, broaden into other areas. So that is going really well. We've been in market for just around 4 years. We're approaching 100 paying customers in the US. We've got some of the biggest names in the US hospital system. Some major IDN networks also have adopted our platform. So that's going really well. There's still a lot to do there. We think there's at least 750, possibly 800 US hospitals with a neurosurgical division of a scale that would usefully adopt Quicktome. But then as soon as you move into areas like stroke and disorders of consciousness, TBI, the market just goes up by a factor of 10. Like we think stroke, for example, was probably 10x the size of neurosurgical planning. So we want to prove our credentials, prove the value and utility of our platform with a very important department within a hospital with very important positive outcomes, both in terms of efficacy, minimizing deficits, also economics. A better treated patient needs less time in rehab, needs less time in the hospital. So the economics really help for our customers as well. Once we're established in neurosurgery, and this is already happening, we've got a couple more FDA clearances imminent with the FDA this year. And over time, we expand across the brain health continuum. Longer term, there's clinic and consumer-facing opportunity for the business. And of course, outside the US, there's global opportunity as well. So lots to get through, but we're trying to do it very intentionally, methodically, improving our credentials before we get too ambitious.
That's great. So it would be really interesting if you could provide some patient stories or case examples that demonstrate the value and impact your software delivers in the real world use.
Yeah, no, look, again, back to purpose and mission, lives touched, as well as all the, financial and other KPI metrics you'd expect the team and the board to monitor. Lives touched is one, how ultimately, through the economics, through the SaaS platforms, through all of the business effort, are we transforming patients' lives with better brain insights, driving better patient care? We've had over 15,000 lives touched to date in terms of people that have benefited or where a Quicktome scan has been involved in the chain of activity. A couple of patient stories. Look, we're obviously very, very sensitive to HIPAA compliance. We would never talk about customers or patients without consent, but these have both been in the media, so I can talk about them. The first was in the New York Times. So Lenox Hill in the Upper East Side of New York is one of our customers. Dr. Randy D'Amico is, a passionate believer in Connectomics and has really adopted Quicktome for all of his, clinical work. And he had a patient who was very well known in New York, someone called Alison Stewart. She was a former MTV host. She's a sort of media personality, a podcaster. Speech was obviously absolutely critical to what she did professionally. And in brief, started to have some, brain-related symptoms, got rushed into Lenox Hill urgently. An MRI scan showed some sort of, it wasn't a tumor eventually, it was actually an infection, but something in the brain area that needed to be removed. Absent Quicktome and Omniscient's brain maps showing these higher cognitive networks and the brain networks that were previously invisible from a standard 2D picture or image of the brain, Dr. D'Amico is essentially able to execute his procedure by avoiding the language network. A fact-based decision in advance about the trade-offs. There will always be some element of deficit after a brain surgery, but in this case, he could prioritize a direction, a trajectory for the operation which avoided the language network. And he said, absent Quicktome, back in the day, there was a certain way neurosurgeons were trained. He would have chopped right through the language network. So whilst Alison may have woken up, able to move and have reasonable function, her language would have been impaired. And obviously, given what she does professionally, that was not something she wanted. So it's a great story. I can send you the link if you want to put that in the show notes, Robert. The other one was also in New York, also from Lenox Hill. It was an NYU student. They're always heart-wrenching stories, 19, 20-year-old, I think, who again started having some, nausea, and it wasn't quite a headache, but she knew something was wrong, was rushed in, had an MRI scan, and sure enough, in this case, there was a tumor. Happy ending, it was a benign tumor, but again, as part of the decision-making around removing the tumor, in the past, there was a lot of uncertainty about what the outcomes would be, what the impact would have been, pre-Connectomics. But again, utilizing Quicktome's brain maps, a very confronting conversation, but at least a fact-based one in advance was, we can go in direction A, where your memory may be impacted, or direction B, where your speech may be impacted. Like I say, a very confronting conversation to have. But again, in the case of the student, she was absolutely adamant, I'm young, I don't want anything that impacts my memory. I'm willing to work through the rehab on any other outcomes. Very successful case study. Again, I can share a really nice YouTube clip of a news story on this. But again, giving insights that were really invisible to the profession, pre-Connectomics and pre-Omniscient having the Quicktome platform in market.
Yeah, we'd certainly be interested in getting those clips, so we can probably put them in our podcast recap note. Anyway, moving back to the corporate side, you've just completed an institutional funding round. What's your strategy for scaling Omniscient to moving forward? And additionally, does your roadmap include a potential exit strategy being pursued in the future?
Yeah, Robert, good question. Obviously, we very recent news. So, we're recording this in February. We closed the round literally, just before Christmas in 2025. So we're currently reviewing our strategic plan and really honing in, what comes next for the next 3 years. I don't think it'll be hugely different what was previously envisaged. The nice thing we have, Robert, nobody rings a bell in startup land when you're no longer a startup, you're now a scale up. But I do kind of feel we've crossed that chasm. We have a minimum viable product. We've got amazing testimonials. We've got amazing customer retention, some amazing patient stories, and adoption and really tremendous operating traction in the market. So really it's largely throwing more fuel into that fire. So putting more people in the market. I mentioned we're a team of 50 in the bigger scheme of things, our go-to-market sales, marketing, med-ed team, customer success is relatively small. So we just need more geographic coverage. We're getting great results across the US. We've got little geographic clusters in New York, in Florida, in parts of Texas where, shock horror, we've had people based in the last 3-4 years. We just need more. America's a big old place. Like I say, there's 750 plus hospitals just in neurosurgery to go after. So it's more of the same. It's not doing anything, completely new and Hail Mary-esque in terms of strategy. It's scaling what we're already doing, but obviously, as I talked earlier, expanding more and more capability to our platform, adding more and more use cases and FDA clearances so we can move, beyond neurosurgery into stroke, into coma, also areas such as BCI and DBS, so brain-computer interface, deep brain stimulation. There's so many applications for our technology. We want to start to navigate and address those in the coming years and, continue to grow the revenue velocity of the business. In terms of exits, I think we're going to stay largely focused on the US, Robert, in the next 3 years. In terms of exit, sure, we've got some very notable backers, both in the high net worth and family office world, but also now in the institutional world. We aspire for an IPO exit. Potentially that could be the Australian Stock Exchange, that could be the NASDAQ. I'm the damp squid at the party that keeps saying things like, look, let's just execute, let's deliver, let's build, a market-leading, profitable AI tech business with moats and lots of protection, and then kind of the good stuff will take care of itself, whether that's an IPO, whether that's a trade sale, whether we just, our current shareholders want to hold the business for longer and reap the financial benefits of having a strong, profitable business. But quite possible in a 3 to 5 year time horizon, an IPO could come on the horizon.
That's thanks, got that one. Interesting. So you mentioned Neurotech. Neurotech as a whole is developing into an exciting macro market investment class. And with the likes of Elon Musk's Neuralink, amongst others, BCI is a big focus of that. Can Omniscient's brain maps power other segments of the neurotech market?
Again, great question, Robert. And absolutely, it's a big, big part of our thinking. We talk about the brain data economy or the brain data ecosystem that Connectomics can, fuel and power and unlock a whole range of new industries that were, impossible prior to having this level and depth and granularity and precision in brain insights. So we're already having discussions with people in the BCI space, given Elon Musk's prominence and profile, and frankly, the brilliance of the Neuralink vision. There is understandably a lot of attention going into BCI. There's a lot of capital going into BCI. If you look at Neurotech, it's a very exciting emerging asset class. VCs are now setting up Neurotech specific funds. Investors are looking for exposure specifically to this asset class. And BCI is a big part of that story. It's a big reason why people are interested. So absolutely. Anywhere where, maps, targets, reports related to the brain are required, we feel that Omniscient can play a critical and pivotal unlocking part. So clearly, if anyone, again, whether it's BCI or DBS, I mentioned earlier, deep brain stimulation or transcranial magnetic stimulation is a form of neuromodulation where the brain is stimulated. Wherever you're looking for a precision location in the brain, either to stimulate, treat, or place a chip, absolutely. We feel we've got the world's best maps, the depth and granularity of insight on both the location of the networks and services, circuits, but also how they're firing. I see partnerships back to our sort of 3-year strategy and 3-year vision. We'll continue to sell direct into hospitals, and that will be the sort of underpinning of the annuity income stream in the business via the SaaS model. But I see partnerships unlocking some real growth vectors as well.
Great. So in terms of market opportunity, you're currently focused on the US market. Maybe you could tell us how big the addressable market is for you in the US. And then do you see any global expansion potential in the future?
Yep, it's a good question, Robert. And again, having just spent best part of the last 12 months talking a whole range of investors about our business, we've had a data room, we have a ton of analysis on potential markets, addressable markets, the size of markets. Not all the data is perfect, but I guess the lowest hanging fruit for Omniscient, where currently an MRI, a standard MRI that any hospital in America would have, is the data input to our cloud-based machine learning and AI steps that generate the precise personalized brain map. Anywhere where a brain MRI is already part of the standard of care, so in other words, it's happening anyway, there isn't a change management process to drive either clinical and workflow adoption of a new process, is where we feel Omniscient can play. And in the vast bulk of places, we feel the added insight from an Omniscient map will add value. We're going to get to that sequentially by indication, but we think there's about 10 million brain MRIs happening every single year in the US already. I mentioned earlier, if we're currently in the tens of thousands, we aspire to get to the hundreds of thousands, then the millions, and then over Omniscient's life, the billions. Probably where we start is the focus on those 10 million MRIs that are already happening. And whilst there is always a change management process when new insights and new tech is introduced, it's a lower lift than, say, in the field of psychiatry, where I think I mentioned earlier, if 1 in 5 Americans has a diagnosable mental health disorder every year, that's another 60 million people where we feel brain insights, connectomic analysis, functional analysis can be critical and pivotal to unlocking personalized solutions in the same way genomics has unlocked that in terms of DNA and cell analysis and personalizing treatment with, oncologies like lung cancer and breast cancer. We see that future vision in psychiatry as well. I think realistically, that's a longer time horizon because, as I say, currently and somewhat bizarrely, despite psychiatry all being about the organ in your head, the brain in your head, currently treatments generally do not involve studying the actual organ that is driving the problem. There is no MRI currently in the clinical chain, and we want to address that over time. But initially, our focus will be on standard of care brain MRIs happening today. And look, Rob, it's very hard to get global data. If there's 10 million happening in the US, a reasonable rule of thumb is that at least the same again is happening in the rest of the world, probably more. So that's a big addressable market for us to go after.
Yeah, thank you for that. So final question from me. You have staff based in Australia, US, and Canada. Can you talk about the challenge of growing a scale up with such a disparate workforce?
Yeah, it's another great question, Robert. And it's something we spend a lot of time thinking about. In many ways, Omniscient was born as a COVID baby. So, when I joined in 2021 and my colleagues for the 18 months prior to that, large chunks of that, work from home was mandated. Even if we'd wanted to, none of us could get together. So we developed a culture, a way of working, a collaboration style, kind of with a work at home, remote first assumption, I would say. Like we do have clusters in Sydney and in Toronto, and absolutely get-togethers do happen with the team, but we've found a way to make this work. The technology tools available for remote working now are incredible. We leverage the Google Suite for end-to-end workflows that, helps us as well. The tech team utilize all the sort of standard workflow and business process tools you'd expect to allow them to collaborate. I will say we've got an amazing team. We've got a high-performing team. Back to mission and purpose. When you've got a draw like making the world better, one brain at a time, potentially being part of a business that can unlock the mysteries of mental health, it really binds people to the business. And we've just got a phenomenal group of people that find a way to get things done. So any barriers caused by time zones or remote work, we find a way and we are making it work. So exciting times. We'll see as we grow into the future. We're through, obviously, the pandemic, whether we, like many businesses, we're assessing whether offices work at various cities around the world. But for now, we're largely a remote workforce, and we're driving great results.
Well, thanks, Adam, for guiding us through Omniscient's technology and business model so succinctly in what is really a very complex but undoubtedly most exciting area of development in healthcare at the moment. So I'll pass it back to Tim.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, Adam, thanks. That was a fascinating conversation. I genuinely wish your firm the best because you're doing critical work that could really improve tens and tens of millions of people's lives around the world. So best wishes for that. And thanks, gentlemen, for joining me today.
I really appreciate the opportunity. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, industry-specific symposiums, and conference schedules. We will see you next time for another edition of the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. Finally, a special thanks to the producer and editor of the podcast, Krista Fitzpatrick.